Hello friends, I am Nisha Sharma, Associate Professor, Department of English. Our lecture today is in continuation with our previous lecture of stanza-wise analysis of Thomas Gray's Elegy, and this analysis will be concluded today. And till now we have learned how these peoples were deprived of greatness due to their poverty and due to their illiteracy, and what benefits did they get due to being poor and illiterate. So poet wants to conclude that the poverty on the one hand kept their virtues in limits, but at the same time it also kept their vices in checks. Now comes the autobiographical portion of the poem. Here the poet says, "For thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate, if chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate." For thee, these you, yourself. The poet is referring to himself. Mindful of the unhonored dead, taking in mind those peoples who died an unhonored death, you wrote this poem in their honor. And the poet doesn't believe that it is quite a literary or quite a great poem, so he calls his poem artless tale. For thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dust is for does. In these lines is the lines of the poem, their artless tale relate. Artless is the simple life story of these people. Relate is described. If chance, it may happen that by chance, by lonely contemplation led, use of alliteration, some kindred is similar, spirit shall inquire thy fate. The poet is talking about that just as Thomas Gray entered this churchyard and saw this neglected spot, and in order to honor these simple graves, he related their stories in his poem. It may happen that by chance in future some other poet who is in temperament like Thomas Gray, doing meditation in lonely places, might come here, and then he would inquire about Thomas Gray. Haply, some hoary-headed swain may say. Haply is perhaps. Some hoary-headed is grey-haired, because that person might have grown old. Hoary-headed swain is shepherd, may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away, to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. Then what that hoary-headed or is it person would say? That normally we have seen Thomas Gray at the time of morning, walking with fast steps, moving dewdrops from the grass with his footsteps, to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. In order to have sunsight, or in order to reach the high lawn just at the time of sunrise, we have seen him walking with his hasty steps. This report would be given by some old villager about Thomas Gray to another imaginary poet who have come to inquire about Thomas Gray. Here, happily, hoary-headed, hasty. There, at the foot of yonder nodding beech that reaches its old fantastic root so high, his listless length at noontide would he stretch, and pour upon the brook that babbles by. And what would he say? There, by pointing at a beech tree, the person would say, under that beech tree which is nodding in the air, we have seen which beech tree? That wreaths. Wreaths is twist, twines. It's old fantastic roots so high. It's an age-old tree. His listless strength, the poet would be lying there fully stressed in an idle manner and pour upon the brook that babbles by. And he would be continuously gazing at the small river that is making noise nearby or that is flowing with a pleasant sound. This shows the poet's love of nature. What the villager, the information which has been supplied by the villager about the poet is that the poet used to love nature. In order to witness beautiful sunrise scene, he would daily walk with hasty steps towards the lawn to look at the sun. And during noontime, we would find him lying peacefully in an idle manner under the beech tree and looking continuously above the river which is flowing and listening to its music. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in a scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove, now drooping, woeful when, like one forlorn, or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless one. Sometime he would be found in nearby wood or trees, muttering his, smiling as in scorn, as if he is making fun of something, and he would be talking with himself, his wayward thoughts. Muttering is speaking, wayward is random thoughts. Muttering his wayward fancies he would rove. While walking he would be talking to himself. Now dropping. Sometimes he would look quite dejected or depressed. Woeful when. Woeful is sorrowful. When colorless, cheerless. Like one forlorn. Like one forlorn means one person who has been dejected or one person who has been in a very pitiful condition, or crazed with care, or who is quite worried, or crossed in hopeless love, or one who has received disappointment or dejection in love. The whole stanza is full of use of instances of alliteration. Thus, people found him walking in the woods. Sometimes he was happy, but sometimes he was dejected. Sometimes he was talking with himself, and sometimes he was totally silent as if he has been rejected in love. This is the information that the villager would supply about the poet, and then he would say, one morn I missed him on the accustomed hill, along the heath and near his favourite tree. Another came, no, yet beside the rill, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. And the poet would, the information he would supply is that one morning I did not find him on that hill where he was, where I was accustomed to see him, or where I always saw him. He was not even found in the heath or in the wood. He was not even found near his favorite beech tree. Next day also came, and I didn't find him even near the river, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. He was neither at the lawn, nor at the wood, nor near the river. The next way dirge is due in sad array. Dirge is a sad song or elegiac song. The next bit dirge is due in sad array. Arrays, garments, wearing mournful clothes. I saw him being carried away by the people towards the churchyard, singing mournful songs. The next day, I saw people were singing sad songs and wearing mournful clothes, and slowly they were taking him towards the churchyard path. Approach and read, and then that imaginary poet then that villager would say to the imaginary poet, "Come near and read the lay's epitaph graved on the stone beneath yon is thorn." The epitaph which has been inscribed on the stone under the thorn tree, you can read the epitaph because you are a literate person. And the poet has written his epitaph himself. Here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair signs frowned not upon his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Here rests his head upon the earth. Here means at this ground, rest is buried his body upon the lap of earth. Lap of earth. A youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Lap of earth because people lie in their mother's lap, and here earth is regarded as the mother of the poet. And he was a young man who was poor and who didn't receive any fame during his lifetime. Fair signs frowned not on his humble birth. Frown not means it looked favorably. Knowledge didn't frown because he was born in a humble family. What the poet wants to say is he was quite literate, quite knowledgeable, and melancholy marked him for her own. But by temperament, he was melancholy or sad. Here, poet has personified science and youth and fortune and fame and melancholy. Melancholy said that it is the dear child of her. Large was his bounty. About the poet, in the epitaph is written that he was quite generous and his soul sincere, and he was totally unaffected, very sincere person. Heaven did a recompense, as largely said. God made a repayment. As he was quite generous, he was quite sincere, God also compensated him. He gave to misery all he had, a tear. Misery is for miserable people, poor people. Whatever he had, he gave to poor people. And what he had for them is tear, his sympathy. And he gained from heaven, it was all he wished, a friend. And in return, what did God give him? God gave him a friend, and that was all that he desired. And this friend here referred is his favorite friend, dear friend, close friend, Richard West. No further seek his merits to disclose or draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. And then the villager would say, no further. The poet has written in his own epitaph that there is no need to make a detailed inspection or detailed trial to disclose or to open the merits which were possessed by poet. And there is also no need to draw his weaknesses from his fearful abode or residence, that is his grave. There they alike. Alike is identical, similar. There they alike. This dread abode is the there they alike. In trembling hope repose. Repose is rest. Whether he had merits or demerits, whether he had good qualities or bad qualities, one shouldn't try to examine them now, because whatever he possessed, good or bad, is lying with him in his grave, and he has, they look at the phrase trembling hope. Trembling hope is he has a fear that he would be punished for his bad qualities or his sins, and he is anxious and he is happy that he would be rewarded for his good qualities. But whether he possesses good qualities or bad qualities, all of them are lying in the lap of his Father, that is his God. So poet says that one should not make any other try to make an inquiry about the poet's qualities, merits or demerits. We should not try to we should not make further attempt to count his virtues and faults, because he is buried and dead. His virtues are in the grave. He has a hope he would be rewarded for them, and he has a fear that he would be punished by God. But he is at the mercy of God, that is his Father. And at this note, the poet ends the poem. And in our next lecture, we'll make a critical analysis, or we can say a critical appreciation of the poem. Thank you.